He took his place, swinging the bat around and grinning slyly at Alice. They could always find a moment to flirt, even in the midst of a game. "Love ya, babe," he mouthed to her, and she blew him a quick kiss before whirling the ball past him, resulting in his first strike. His smile never faded, too in love to care much about the fact that his girl was beating him. The second pitch came in low and Jasper hit it into the ground, where it skidded straight into Carlisle. He bounced it off his foot and ran it to first base, colliding with Jasper as they both broke into laughter. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Bella jump to her feet, a look of concern on her face. She seemed to relax when Esme gently said, "Safe," and she hesitantly sat back down. I thought she understood that it takes a lot more than crashing into each other to cause us any harm. I'd have to let her watch Emmett and I go at it someday to prove there really wasn't anything for her to worry about. 112. My team was up to bat and Emmett took over Alice's place on the pitcher's mound. He smiled at me as I stepped up to bat and I rolled my eyes. His favorite trick was running through the periodic table in his head, just to make sure I had no knowledge of how or when he was going to hurl the ball at me. The first pitch whirled by and I heard him chuckle. "Oh yeah, I've been practicing." I concentrated and gripped the bat as I attempted to hit the second ball. Strike 2. Another laugh from Emmett. "Come on. You'd better hit this one. Bella's watching." I forced myself to focus, ignoring his mental chattering. Like a flash, the ball left his hand and finally collided with my bat. I took off, watching as Rosalie raced for the ball she hadn't expected me to hit. I knew she had no chance of catching it and I smiled triumphantly as I rounded home plate, casting a quick smile in Bella's direction. Emmett managed to strike out first Alice, then Carlisle. Determined and confident as I stepped up for my second round at bat. I hit the first of his pitches with a loud crack. A piece of the bat flew into the air and I took off running. This time Rosalie was prepared, having started running before Emmett had even released the ball. I knew she'd caught it when I heard her victorious yell come from the middle of the forest. Rotating batting order. Emmett paced as Alice struck out Jasper. Rosalie only made it to first thanks to Carlisle's speed and dexterity. With a sly grin, Emmett stepped up to the plate and hit the first pitch. I took off and jumped for it but couldn't get a grip as it bounced off my fingers, ricocheted off a tree and buried itself in a dense patch of ferns. By the time I found it, both Rosalie and Emmett were grinning at me from home plate. Jasper managed to hit Alice's first pitch and it sailed almost too easily into my hands, making their third out. Thrilled by the excitement of the game, I ran to Bella as we changed positions and Carlisle stepped up to bat. It didn't escape my notice that Alice was smiling wildly at me as I approached Bella. "What do you think?" I asked, ecstatic that she was there sharing it with me. "One thing's for sure. I'll never be able to sit through dull old Major League Baseball again," she said with a smile. "And it sounds like you did so much of that before," I said, laughing at how hard she was trying to seem enthusiastic. "She's having a good time, Edward," Esme assured me with a sideways glance. "She's very impressed. I am a little disappointed," she said with the funniest little smile. "Why, well, it would be nice if I could find just one thing you didn't do better than everyone else on the planet, see? I told you. She's proud of you," Esme added. I smiled widely at Bella and listened to her accelerated heart. "I'm up," I sighed reluctantly, as the other team's impatient thoughts took me away from the moment. I noticed Rosalie slowly backing up into the woods, so I decided to hit low. I slid into second just before Emmett caught up with me, and waited for Carlisle's hit that would hopefully give me the 113 chance to finish the run. He didn't disappoint, sending the ball soaring through the treetops. I strolled casually toward home, letting Carlisle catch up, and we both touched home together with smiles and high fives as Alice came flitting over to join the celebration. Our team quickly took the lead as Emmett mumbled things like "lucky" and "show off" under his breath. We were in the middle of the fifth inning when Alice suddenly dropped the ball with a gasp. I stared at her in horror as the image that had assaulted her filled my every thought. 3 crimson-eyed vampires, speeding through the forest. They were heading directly for us. I didn't bother asking her for details, only able to think of one thing. I rushed to Bella's side, locking my arms tightly around her as I continued to filter through exactly what Alice was seeing. "Alice," Esme asked nervously. Though her stare was fixed on the protective stance I'd taken over Bella, I didn't see I couldn't tell. Alice breathed apologetically, eyes staring into mine. I'm sorry, Edward. I should have been paying closer attention. I shook my head, unwilling to let her feel any more guilt than what I'd already caused her today. It was my fault, bringing Bella so far out into the forest when we knew the nomads were nearby. What is it? Alice, Carlyle asked as the rest of my family formed a circle around us. They were traveling much quicker than I thought. I can see I had the perspective wrong before, she said quietly, glancing up at Jasper. The threat of danger started to sink in and he moved closer to her, as protective as I was being of Bella. Alice was significantly less breakable, though of course that didn't negate his instinct to defend her. What changed? He asked her gently. They heard us playing, and it changed their path, she said woefully. I'm sorry. I should have seen it, her mind kept repeating. All of us glanced at Bella, who was looking paler than I'd ever seen her. How soon? Carlyle asked me, likely realizing that if I could already hear them clearly the answer was too soon. I listened carefully, worried when I picked them out so quickly. Focusing in on voices I'd never heard before was usually more difficult, but their intent was crystal clear. They were curious, hoping to obverse the unconventional vampires they couldn't understand. And they wanted to play. This should be interesting. They actually call themselves a family, how absurd. Maybe they'll let us join in the game. Oh, a little sport would be so much fun. Less than 5 minutes. I finally said, estimating as best I could from their surroundings and the speed they were traveling. They're running, they want to play. I added with disgust. We were like some little science project to them. Can you make it? Carlyle asked hopefully, glancing at Bella's terrified face. No, not carrying. I stopped myself, not wanting to give Bella away to make her feel this was in any way her fault. I'd been careless and I had to figure out how to make her safe. Besides, I added as a terrible thought crossed my mind. The last thing we need is for them to catch the scent and start hunting. Bella shivered beside me and I held her closer, wishing she was back in her bed, safely curled up in my arms with me singing her to sleep. 114, how many? Emmett asked Alice, as his body instinctively shifted into a fighting stance. Of course he would assume this had to end in destruction. 3, he said, a sickening smile spreading across his face. Let them come. I could use a little exercise, his mind added, far too excited by the idea. I tried not to think about how I was in fact, somewhat comforted by my brother's willfulness to rip to shreds anyone who threatened our tightly bonded family. I sincerely hoped it wouldn't come to that. But, whatever it takes to keep Bella safe. All of us, except Emmett who was too busy planning the fight, turned to Carlyle. In times like this we all relied on him as our leader, to help us choose the best course of action. I was sifting through Alice's mind, trying to find anything we might have missed when Carlyle spoke again. Let's just continue the game, he said calmly. Alice said they were simply curious. I stared at him with wide eyes, unwilling to accept the best thing to do was to stand around and wait. Trust me, Edward. It's for the best. You can't get her to safety without risking crossing paths with them. We'll keep her behind us until we can distract them enough to provide you the escape you need. I won't let anything happen to any of our family. Esme was watching the intensity of my stare with Carlyle. We love her too, Edward. We won't let any harm come to her, she added. Once again her thoughts were perfectly in sync with his, and I relaxed infinitesimally at the sheer conviction in her tone. If it came down to it, my family would fight for the girl I loved, and I loved them all the more for it. Are they thirsty? She muttered aloud so that Carlyle could hear. I shook my head, relieved that none of them seemed to be thinking about hunting. As much as I hated to think of the human blood that must have been recently spilled, it made me less fearful for Bella. Their senses wouldn't be heightened the way they would be if they hadn't just gorged themselves. You catch. Esme. I'll call it now. I finally said, firmly taking my stance as Bella's protector. My vow to her had never felt stronger as I thought about the lengths I would go to ensure her safety. I'd fight them all if I had to, rip every last one of them apart. Everyone took their places again on the field. Alice and Esme staying the closest. No one dared go farther than was necessary to keep up the charade of the game. Take your hair down, I whispered to Bella, idly remembering how I thought that would make a difference when she met my family. It was ridiculous to think that a thin layer of hair could mask her luscious scent, but nevertheless I needed to do everything in my power to keep her hidden. As she let out her ponytail and ruffled her hair, it only stirred her scent more, filling the air around us with it. "The others are coming now," she said quietly, trying to mask her fear. "Yes, stay very still. Keep quiet, and don't move from my side, please." I was trying to hide my own terror, not wanting her to be any more afraid than she already was. Gently and lovingly, I ran my fingers through her hair and brought it around her face, covering as much skin as I could. "That won't help," Alice whispered, observing my actions. "I could smell her across the field, I know," I admitted, remembering how every rustle of the wind had brought her scent to me like a tidal wave. I only hoped that her blood wouldn't be as potent to our visitors, that their senses would be dull, her scent masked by all the other smells of the forest and wildlife. As we watched the others resume the game, their eyes constantly darting through the surrounding forest. Bella gazed up at me. 115, what did Esme ask you? There was no hiding anything from her. She was far too observant. I debated whether or not to tell her, but figured it was better she know. It was very fortunate that the answer to Esme's question had been in our favor, and I hoped it would ease her mind slightly. "Whether they were thirsty," I said softly, trying to infuse my voice with reassurance. I listened to my family's thoughts, all but one of which were focused on every possible outcome. Emmett was sure it would end in a fight, and he'd even managed to get Jasper a little excited about the idea. Carlyle, always the voice of reason, was thinking of ways to simply talk them into leaving. Alice couldn't stop apologizing to me, which made me feel even more miserable. Esme was muttering positive thoughts and promises that things would be okay. Rosalie was despicable. She'd reached a new low, and I tried very hard to block out her every thought. Ridiculous. All this anxiety to save some girl because Edward can't get over his stupid infatuation-induced crush. Should have just stayed home. Not worth my energy. Not worth anything. I stared into the forest, trying to figure out which direction they would come from. I needed to keep as much distance as possible between them and Bella. Maybe Carlyle was right. Maybe he could simply get them talking, answer all their questions about the strange vegetarian vampires they were so fascinated with. Bella and I could simply walk away from the scene while their attention wasn't on us. I tried to convince myself it was possible, but something inside me knew it wouldn't be that simple. "I'm sorry, Bella," I whispered, despising myself for my foolishness. "It was stupid, irresponsible, to expose you like this. I'm so sorry." She didn't say a word, though I hoped she knew I would die before letting any harm come to her. I felt my breath catch as I saw the first hint of movement in the trees beyond right field. I stepped in front of Bella, blocking her as best I could from their approach. The rest of my family heard the noise a second after I did. The cracking of branches, shifting of trees, and stealthy footsteps of the three vampires who threatened to destroy the person I loved most. The Hunt EPOV, 116. My jaw was clenched tightly, and it was a struggle to keep from reaching out to hold onto Bella. Everything in me wanted to wrap my arms around her, protect her, shelter her from whatever was coming. But I knew better. And even if I didn't. Carlyle's racing thoughts reminded me of the necessity of acting normal as he silently repeated one thing and one thing only. "She needs to blend in, we can't draw attention to her." As the three nomads stepped out of the forest and into the clearing, my family and I instinctively huddled closer together. We formed a sort of arrowhead in the grass with Carlyle at the point, our leader as always, and Emmett and Jasper, who were all too ready to attack on either side of him. Rosalie and Esme were behind Emmett. Alice and I behind Jasper, both carefully trying to block Bella's scent from the approaching predators. Mirroring our shape, one of the males walked out in front, the woman and other male on either side of him a few steps back. I listened carefully, trying to pick out any shift in their thoughts, anything that would indicate they knew they were in the presence of a human. Knowing that Emmett and Jasper were ready to fight, and that the others would join in to protect us. I planned my escape should it be necessary. As difficult as it would be to flee knowing my family was fighting for us. I wouldn't hesitate for 1 second to run Bella to safety if any of the nomads thought of harming her. There certainly are a lot of them, the male in front thought. What odd creatures, standing around playing games like a happy little family, the woman mused, obviously irritated. So many perfectly delicious dining options wandering around this ridiculous town, and they're feeding on what? Squirrels. The second of the males was eyeing us sarcastically, and I fought back the growl that was building in my throat. I thought of how hard Carlyle worked to preserve human life, and it enraged me to hear it disregarded so callously. I was grateful it was only I who had to endure it. I hoped that our brief encounter would satisfy their curiosity, and when it was over they would leave immediately. It made me cringe to think of them feeding in our home territory. Carlyle took a few tentative steps toward the group. Emmett and Jasper right at his heels. I could see the effort it was taking them to keep their posture calm and relaxed. As they moved, the wind blew gently and I felt my hands ball into fists as I waited for the nomads to react. Thankfully, Bella's scent was blown in the opposite direction, and I relaxed as the first male moved toward Carlyle, no indication he sensed anything was wrong. "We thought we heard a game," he said casually, smiling. "I'm Laurent, these are Victoria and James," he added, motioning to his companions. "I'm Carlyle. This is my family. Emmett and Jasper. Rosalie. Esme and Alice. Edward and Bella, everything is fine. Edward," he added, as if sensing the panic that shot through me when he said her name. "Blending in," I reminded myself. "Just part of the family." I watched as Victoria and James glanced at each of us cautiously, though their thoughts assured me they were merely confused by what they were seeing. They couldn't understand the choices we made, not only in our feeding habits but also by how many were in our family. How does such a large group remain unnoticed? Victoria thought as her eyes continued to take us in. James cocked his head toward me and I again struggled to keep my frame relaxed. Had he picked up on the intensity of my stare? Jasper glanced toward us, feeling how difficult it was becoming for me to keep my composure. I felt a gentle wave of serenity flow around us, though it did little to calm me. 117. Keep it together. Edward. I can only do so much. Do you have room for a few more players? Laurent asked. Actually, we were just finishing up. But we'd certainly be interested another time. Are you planning to stay in the area for long? Carlyle asked and I felt my breath catch. We're headed north, in fact, but we were curious to see who was in the neighborhood. We haven't run into any company in a long time. I could feel the rest of my family exhale in relief and Carlyle continued in his friendly tone. No, this region is usually empty except for us and the occasional visitor, like yourselves. What's your hunting range? If you can even call it that. James and Victoria thought sarcastically in unison. The Olympic range here. Up and down the coast ranges on occasion. We keep a permanent residence nearby. There's another permanent settlement like ours up near Denali. We all saw Laurent take a small step back as if he were in shock, but only I heard the rush of nearly incoherent thoughts that played through his mind. Carlyle was trying to make sense of his reaction. He doesn't believe the stories. Does he? He wonders if maybe we're really just like the rest of them, and just claiming this territory for ourselves, he asked me silently. Having heard traces of disbelief in Laurent's mind amidst his genuine curiosity. I nodded almost invisibly to Carlyle. Permanent, Laurent finally asked. How do you manage that? Why don't you come back to our home with us and we can talk comfortably? It's a rather long story. Carlyle's intention was twofold. First and most importantly, he was providing Bella and I the escape we needed. Second, he truly wanted these vampires who were everything he wasn't to understand that there was another way to live. He needed them to see that human bloodshed was not the only option, even if he had almost no hope of changing their ways. James and Victoria looked at each other as they each contemplated whether they actually wanted to venture into our large family's home. It all seemed so foreign to them. Laurent was clearly pleased by the invitation and smiled warmly at us. That sounds very interesting, and welcome. We've been on the hunt all the way down from Ontario, and we haven't had the chance to clean up in a while. Their lifestyle does appear considerably more hygienic, he thought. Taking in our cleanliness. Even after an afternoon playing baseball, we were nothing compared to the filthy, disheveled creatures who stood before us, remnants of traveling and feeding apparent on every soiled inch of them. Please don't take offense, but we'd appreciate it if you'd refrain from hunting in this immediate area. We have to stay inconspicuous. You understand. Carlyle added gently. Of course. We certainly won't encroach on your territory. We just ate outside of Seattle, anyway. He laughed, nonchalant as the rest of us fought the wave of disgust running through us. I could hear Bella's heart speed up, and I wished with everything in me she'd never had to hear about the atrocities that were all too common among the worst of our kind. The only satisfaction I could gain from this meeting was my own knowledge that standing between the nomads and Bella, I felt more human than vampire. 118. We'll show you the way if you'd like to run with us. Emmett and Alice, you can go with Edward and Bella to get the jeep, he said casually. I felt Bella's breathing steady as she realized the encounter was coming to a close. Soon I would have her safely in her bed, my arms around her, singing her to sleep. I might never stop singing for fear that this nightmare would take hold of her and cause her more pain. As the group started to disperse and my fears slowly dissipated, I began to loathe myself for having allowed Bella to be exposed to such danger. It was almost as painful as when I'd been afraid I was capable of hurting her, though this time I felt at least somewhat absolved. I'd been allowed to be her protector, as I'd sworn to be for the rest of time, and I felt some relief at having been able to uphold my promise. Just as Carlyle's final words before our departure rang through the air, the breeze picked up again. I barely had time to notice that the winds had changed and they were now blowing Bella's scent right towards the nomads, when James' head snapped toward us. My body tensed, ready to leap on him if he took just one step toward her. Human. His every thought was consumed with her as he crouched and readied himself to attack. Warm, blood pulsing, so frail. I lowered myself to meet his stance, lips curled back over my teeth, growling ferociously in an attempt to make him back down. He was not only outnumbered but outmatched. I felt stronger and more powerful than I thought possible, driven by the most intense desire I'd ever felt. It raged through me, fierce and all-consuming. Protect Bella. She's all that matters, today and forever. No harm will ever come to her. What's this? I faintly heard Laurent ask, though I diverted none of my attention to him. I was busy carefully matching James' every movement as he tried to shift to one side. I didn't even want that savage looking at my Bella. She's with us. Carlyle said sternly. Edward. Don't move unless he attacks. You brought a snack? Laurent asked, suddenly catching Bella's scent and moving unthinkingly toward us. I let another deafening snarl escape and Laurent staggered backward. James' thoughts, which had been focused solely on the kill, finally settled into something that sounded almost like amusement. A little protective of our food, are we? I fought the urge to respond, telling myself that the last thing we needed was for James to inadvertently learn of my ability to read his mind. I said she's with us. Carlyle repeated firmly. But she's human. Laurent said, utterly stunned. Amazing. They really are what they say they are. Yes, he said simply as Emmett moved into place beside him, cautioning James with his eyes. James stood back up, but I stayed crouched and ready to lunge. Bella's ragged breathing was agonizing and I tried to block out the frantic panic of her heart. I had to stay focused. Everything in me wanted to grab her and run, but I had no way of knowing how fast or strong James was. All I could feel was his determination, and that was enough to keep me frozen in place. His eyes were locked on Bella, nostrils flared and a sadistic smile was tugging at his mouth. Well, this should be interesting. A whole family of vampires protecting one pathetic little human. One of whom seems rather attached to her. 119. I was faintly aware of the fact that Laurent and Carlyle were still speaking. Their voices still sounded unusually calm considering what was taking place around them. It appears we have a lot to learn about each other. Laurent said smoothly. Indeed, but we'd like to accept your invitation. For 1 second, his words broke both James and my focus. I saw Laurent glance toward Bella out of the corner of his eye before adding. And, of course, we will not harm the human girl. We won't hunt in your range, as I said, sorry. All bets off. James thought as he turned to glare at Laurent. His eyes flickered next to Victoria as he thought. Just you and me, babe, in what was a strangely melancholy tone. She seemed to understand what his gaze was telling her and I had no doubt she would comply. Interesting how one difference of opinion was all it took to disband their small group. We'll show you the way. Carlyle said, still addressing Laurent, though I was beginning to understand that the power of the trio lied with James, Jasper, Rosalie, Esme. My family quickly formed a tight circle, protecting Bella from view. Alice was beside her, watching her lovingly as she tried to comfort me. Everything's going to be fine. Edward. They know they can't fight off all of us. The worst is over. Bella is perfectly safe. Let's go. Bella, I said softly. I expected her to move, to collapse into my arms from the stress of it all, but she was frozen. I reached out to grip her elbow, tugging gently until her muscles finally relaxed. I pulled her along beside me, wishing I could run but trying to appear composed in case James was still watching. Obviously he had already figured out how protective I was of Bella, but something told me it was still best to act calm, not antagonize him anymore. As soon as we were out of view from the others, I pulled Bella up and her arms latched around my shoulders. Somehow she felt even more fragile than she had mere hours ago. I whispered a silent apology as I took off at blinding speed. I knew Alice and Emmett were falling farther behind with each passing second, but I couldn't will myself to slow down. I wanted Bella as far from that place, from those monsters, as possible. I tried to be gentle as I put Bella inside the Jeep, but fury was coursing through my veins. Whether it was fury at James for his desire to destroy everything I loved, or fury at myself for allowing him the opportunity. I wasn't sure. Emmett and Alice caught up to us, and dove into the Jeep. Strap her in. I told Emmett as I revved the engine. The moment I heard the click of her harness, my foot pressed firmly on the gas. I cursed myself quietly, letting the anger flow through me rather than fighting it off like I should have. It was cowardly and it wasn't fair to Bella, but anger was easier than the other emotions. If I didn't allow my fury to consume me, I would be left with guilt, frustration, despair. Bella was not going to be happy with what was coming next. She wouldn't understand, and unfortunately I couldn't let that matter. I allowed the anger fill me again, silencing the agony of knowing how much what we were going to do would upset her. I had hoped her fear would keep the question I knew was coming away for a few more minutes. Just let me have the anger a little longer. Of course Bella was quicker than then. Where are we going? She asked, not even a minute after turning onto the main highway. I didn't answer. I didn't move. Edward, you have to talk to her. 120. Fess up, man, we all know what you're doing. Damn it. Edward. Where are you taking me? She screamed, breaking my already dead heart. If you don't say it. I will. Alice threatened. We have to get you away from here, far away now. I braced myself for her reaction, tightening my grip on the steering wheel until my hand was molded around it. Turn around. You have to take me home. She yelled, and I heard her start fumbling with her harness. Emmett, I said, though it was nearly a whisper. I was doing what I'd sworn never to do. I was hurting Bella. I was causing her misery. Although I knew it was the only way to keep her safe, it tore me apart, one agonizing plea at a time. No, rip, Edward, tear, no, you can't do this. The last ounce of strength in me seemed to dissolving into nothing. I knew I wouldn't be able to take it for very long and I feared I would give in, give her what she was crying for. Yet this was the only way to keep her safe. I have to, Bella, I said firmly, wishing she could understand the pain I was feeling. Now please be quiet. I softly begged, unable to bear one more anguished outcry. I won't, she yelled, again nearly breaking the last of my will. You have to take me back. Charlie will call the FBI. They'll be all over your family, Carlisle and Esme. They'll have to leave, to hide forever. Calm down. Bella. We've been there before. I said solemnly. I could understand Bella not wanting to be taken from her home. I knew she would be worried about Charlie's safety and what her sudden disappearance would do to him. But I refused to let her be this upset over what it would put my family through. Not over me, you don't. You're not ruining everything over me. She thrashed around in her seat violently and I felt a new wave of guilt wash over me. In the midst of everything, she had managed to find a way of making everything her fault again. Wow, Emmett thought, in yet another one of his completely inappropriate moments. I'm starting to see what you see in this girl. Feisty, isn't she? I would have sneered at him but Alice interrupted. Don't you see what this is doing to her? Edward. I know you're scared, but you can't make her decisions for her. Maybe there's another way, one that doesn't involve kidnapping Bella and holding her against her will. I want her safe too, but I will not let her hate us forever for it. I didn't look at her and I didn't slow down. Edward, pull over. Alice said aloud, fire in her eyes. I glared at her and ground my foot against the pedal, pushing it nearer and nearer its maximum speed. Edward.